The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the Steinhardt Concert Hall. The building was old and beautiful, with high ceilings and gold decorations on the walls. Inside, people were starting to fill the seats. They came from all over the city to watch something special today. Today was the day of the master class. A master class was when a famous musician taught and gave advice to other musicians. But this was not just any master class. This was the master class of Maestro Viktor Petrov, the most famous piano player in the world. Viktor Petrov was 55 years old. He had gray hair that he combed back perfectly. He wore an expensive black suit and shiny shoes. His face was serious, almost cold. He had played piano in the biggest concert halls in London, Paris, New York, and Tokyo. Everyone knew his name. Everyone respected him, but many people also feared him. Why did they fear him? Because Maestro Petrov was known for being very hard on other piano players. When someone made a mistake, he would tell them. When someone played without feeling, he would say harsh words. He did not care if his words hurt people's feelings. He only cared about perfect music. The concert hall had about 500 seats. Almost all of them were full now. People sat quietly waiting. Some were old music lovers who came to every concert. Some were young students from the music school. They all wanted to see the famous maestro teach. On the stage there was a beautiful black grand piano. It was so shiny that you could see your face in it. The piano was worth more money than most people made in 10 years. Next to the stage there was a small room. Inside that room 15 people were waiting. These were the people who would play piano today in front of the maestro. Most of them were young. They were boys and girls in their 20s. They had studied music at expensive schools. They had practiced piano for hours every single day since they were children. Their parents had paid for the best teachers. They wore nice clothes and held their sheet music in fancy leather folders. They were all nervous. Their hands shook a little. Some of them walked back and forth. Others sat very still and closed their eyes, trying to remember every note they would play. They knew that Maestro Petrov could help their careers if he liked them. But if he did not like them, his words could hurt their confidence for years. Among all these young people stood someone very different. Her name was Margaret Chen. She was 73 years old. While everyone else wore concert clothes, Margaret wore a simple dress with flowers on it. The dress was old but clean. She had bought it from a store that sold used clothes. Margaret had gray hair that she kept in a simple bun. Her face had many wrinkles, the kind you get from smiling and crying through many years of life. Her hands were old too. The fingers were bent a little from arthritis, a sickness that makes joints hurt and stiff. She wore no jewelry except a simple gold wedding ring. In her hands, Margaret held some sheet music. But her music was not in a fancy folder. The papers were old and yellow. Some of the corners were torn. She had written notes on the pages with pencil many years ago. The papers shook in her hands because she was very nervous. The young musicians looked at Margaret with confusion. Who was this old woman? Why was she here? This was a master class for serious piano players, for people who wanted to be professionals. What was a grandmother doing here? Two young women whispered to each other. Is she lost? One of them said quietly. Maybe she thinks this is a beginner class, the other one replied. They tried not to laugh, but Margaret saw them looking at her. She felt her face get hot with embarrassment. A young man with blonde hair looked at Margaret's sheet music. He could see how old and worn it was. He looked at his own music, which was brand new and perfect. He felt sorry for the old woman, but also thought she did not belong here. Margaret wanted to leave. She felt like maybe she had made a big mistake. Maybe she was too old for this. Maybe it was crazy to think she could play in front of the great Maestro Petrov. Her heart beat fast in her chest. She thought about her warm kitchen at home, where she could drink tea and not feel so scared. But then she remembered something. She remembered her husband, Robert. Robert had died 1 year ago. Before he died, when he was very sick in the hospital, he had held her hand. He had looked at her with love in his eyes and said, "Margaret, promise me something. Promise me you will play piano again. You gave up your music for us, for the family. But now the children are grown. Now you can do it. Please do not wait anymore." Margaret had cried and promised him. She had kissed his hand and told him yes, she would play again. 2 weeks later, Robert died. After his funeral, after the sad days passed, Margaret remembered her promise. She found her old sheet music in a box in the closet. She started practicing on the old keyboard she had bought years ago. Her fingers did not work like they used to. They hurt, they were slow. But she kept practicing every day. Then she saw an announcement. Maestro Viktor Petrov was coming to the city. He would hold a masterclass. Anyone could sign up. Margaret thought about it for many days. Finally, she decided to be brave. She signed up. She paid the fee even though it was expensive for her. And now here she was in this beautiful concert hall, surrounded by young, talented people who all thought she did not belong. Inside the waiting room, a woman with a clipboard came in. She was the assistant to Maestro Petrov. 5 minutes, she announced. Please line up in order. Remember, when your name is called, walk to the piano, bow to the maestro and the audience, and then begin playing. You have 15 minutes each. The young musicians lined up. Margaret found her place in the line. She was number 12. That meant she would have to wait a long time. She would have to watch 11 other people play before it was her turn. The door opened. The assistant said, "Please follow me." They walked down a hallway and then to the side of the stage. From here, they could see everything. They could see the audience. They could see the piano, and they could see Maestro Viktor Petrov. He stood near the piano talking to someone important looking. Even from far away, you could see that he was confident. He moved like someone who knew he was better than everyone else. He checked his expensive watch. He looked at the audience and gave a small nod. Then he walked to a special chair next to the stage. He sat down and crossed his legs. A microphone was on his shirt so everyone could hear what he said. The lights in the audience became dark. A bright light shone on the stage and the piano. "Good morning," Maestro Petrov said. His voice was deep and clear. Everyone could hear it perfectly. "Welcome to today's masterclass. I am here to help these young musicians improve. I will be honest with them. I will tell them the truth about their playing. Some of you may think I am too hard, too mean, but great music requires great discipline. It requires honesty. That is what I will give today." The audience clapped. Some people nodded. They had come to see the famous maestro's teaching style. "Let us begin," he said. He looked at his assistant. "Call the first student." The assistant looked at her list. "Number 1, David Richardson," she called out. A young man with dark hair walked onto the stage. He was shaking a little, but he tried to look confident. He bowed to the maestro and the audience. Then he sat at the piano and began to play. Margaret watched from the side of the stage. She watched the young man play. She watched Maestro Petrov's face. The maestro sat very still, listening carefully. Sometimes he closed his eyes. Sometimes he wrote notes on a paper. When the young man finished, the maestro spoke. "Your technique is good," he said, "but you play like a machine. There is no soul in your music. You must feel what you play, not just move your fingers." His words were not mean, but they were not warm either. They were just honest and cold. The young man's face fell. He had hoped for better words. He bowed again and left the stage. One by one, the students played. Margaret watched them all. Some were very good. Some made mistakes. Maestro Petrov gave advice to each one. Sometimes his words were helpful. Sometimes they were harsh. One young woman almost cried after he told her that she had wasted his time with her lazy playing. Margaret felt more and more nervous. Her hands became sweaty. Her mouth was dry. She counted the students. Number 8. Number 9. Number 10. Number 11. Soon it would be her turn. She thought again about leaving. She could just walk away. No one would care. But then she thought about Robert. She thought about the promise she made. She thought about the little girl she used to be. The girl who loved piano more than anything in the world. Number 12, the assistant called. Margaret Chen. This was it. There was no going back now. Margaret took a deep breath. Her hands held her old, worn sheet music. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She stepped toward the stage, toward the bright lights, toward the piano, and toward Maestro Viktor Petrov. Margaret walked onto the stage slowly. Her legs felt weak, like they might not hold her up. The bright stage lights were so strong that she had to blink several times. She could not see the faces of the people in the audience clearly. They were just dark shapes in the shadows. But she could hear them. She heard whispers. She heard people moving in their seats. She knew they were surprised to see an old woman walking to the piano. Margaret tried to walk with dignity. She held her head up even though inside she felt so small. Each step seemed to take forever. The stage was not really that big, but it felt like she was walking for miles. Finally, she reached the piano. She remembered what the assistant had said. She turned to face the audience and gave a small bow. Her back hurt a little when she bent down. When she straightened up, she turned to look at Maestro Viktor Petrov. He was staring at her. His eyes were wide with surprise. He had not looked at his list carefully. He did not know that an old woman had signed up for his master class. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stared. Then Margaret saw his expression change. His surprise turned into something else. His eyebrows went up. The corner of his mouth moved into a small smile, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who found something funny when it should not be funny. Maestro Petrov leaned toward his assistant. The woman stood next to his chair, holding her clipboard. He whispered something to her, but he did not whisper quietly enough. The microphone on his shirt picked up his words. Everyone in the whole concert hall heard what he said. "Perhaps she is lost," Maestro Petrov said. "Perhaps she is looking for a retirement home recital?" His words came through the speakers loud and clear. For a second, there was silence. Then someone in the audience laughed. Then another person laughed. Then more people joined in. The laughter spread through the concert hall like a wave. Margaret stood frozen on the stage. She felt her face become very hot. The shame burned through her whole body. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. She wanted to be anywhere but on this stage in front of all these people who were laughing at her. Her hands gripped her sheet music so tightly that the old papers wrinkled even more. She looked down at the floor. She could not look at the audience. She could not look at the maestro. Tears started to form in her eyes, but she blinked hard to stop them. She would not cry, not here. Not in front of everyone. The assistant next to Maestro Petrov looked uncomfortable. She knew her boss had been rude. She gave Margaret a small, apologetic smile, but what could she do? She worked for the maestro. She could not correct him in front of everyone. Some people in the audience stopped laughing. They felt bad for Margaret. An old man in the third row frowned. He did not think the maestro's joke was funny. A middle-aged woman shook her head with disapproval. But many people were still chuckling, still smiling. The young musicians waiting at the side of the stage had different reactions. Some of them felt sorry for Margaret. They knew how it felt to be embarrassed. One young woman put her hand over her mouth in shock. But others thought the maestro was right to question why this old woman was here. They had studied for years. They had given up normal lives to practice music. Why should someone who was not serious take up time in this important masterclass? Margaret stood there for what felt like an hour, but it was really only a few seconds. She had a choice to make. She could turn around and walk off the stage. She could go home and try to forget this terrible day. She could break her promise to Robert. She could give up on music again, just like she had given up 60 years ago. Or she could stay. She could sit at that piano and play. She could show them that she belonged here, even if she was old, even if her hands hurt, even if her sheet music was worn and old. Margaret thought about her life. She thought about being a young girl with big dreams. She had been 12 years old when she first played a real piano. Her family was poor. They lived in a small apartment. But her school had a piano in the music room. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, saw that Margaret loved music. Mrs. Patterson let her stay after school to practice. Margaret practiced every day. She got better and better. Mrs. Patterson told her she had real talent. She said that Margaret could go to music school one day. She could become a concert pianist. Margaret dreamed about it every night. She dreamed about playing on big stages, about making beautiful music, about having a life filled with art. But then everything changed. Margaret's father got sick. He could not work anymore. Her mother had to work 2 jobs, but it was not enough money. The family needed help. Margaret was the oldest of 5 children. She had to help take care of her younger brothers and sisters. She had to quit school and get a job. She was only 15 years old when she stopped playing piano. She got a job in a factory. She worked long hours. Her hands that used to make beautiful music now made boxes and packed products. There was no time for music. There was no money for music. There were only bills to pay and mouths to feed. When Margaret was 22, she met Robert. He was kind and hardworking. He loved her. They got married. They had children. Margaret loved her children more than anything. She worked hard to give them good lives. She cooked and cleaned and sewed their clothes. When they were sick, she stayed up all night to take care of them. The years passed so quickly. The children grew up. They went to college. They got married and had their own children. Margaret and Robert grew old together. They were happy, but sometimes late at night, Margaret would think about the piano. She would think about the music she used to play. She would feel a small sadness in her heart. Then Robert got cancer. He fought hard, but the cancer was too strong. In his last days in the hospital, he held Margaret's hand. He knew about her old dreams. She had told him about them long ago. He told her to go back to music. He made her promise. And she did promise. Standing on that stage now, Margaret remembered that promise. She remembered Robert's face when he asked her to play again. She remembered the love in his eyes. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to finally do what she loved. The laughter in the concert hall was dying down now. People were waiting to see what would happen. Would this old woman leave the stage? Or would she actually try to play? Maestro Petrov was waiting too. He looked at his watch. He was a busy man. He did not want to waste time. He had more serious students to teach. But he would let her play for a minute or two. Then he would politely tell her that this master class was not the right place for her. Maybe he would suggest a community center where old people could play music together. Margaret made her decision. She would stay. She would play. She lifted her head and looked at the piano. The beautiful black grand piano was waiting for her. She walked the last few steps toward it. She pulled out the bench. It made a small scraping sound on the wooden stage floor. She sat down slowly. Her knees hurt a little. Her back was stiff. But she sat up straight with dignity. Margaret placed her sheet music on the piano. She smoothed down the wrinkled pages with her bent fingers. She looked at the notes she had looked at 1,000 times while practicing at home on her old keyboard. Then she looked at her hands. These were not the hands of a young pianist. They were old hands. The skin was loose and spotted with age marks. The joints were swollen from arthritis. The fingers could not move as fast as they used to. Some mornings she could barely make a fist because they hurt so much. But these hands had also done so much. They had held her babies when they were born. They had wiped away her children's tears. They had cooked thousands of meals. They had written letters to soldiers during the war. They had held Robert's hand when he took his last breath. These hands had lived a full life. The audience was very quiet now. Even the people who had laughed were silent. They were curious. What would this old woman play? Would she embarrass herself even more? Maestro Petrov sat in his chair with his arms crossed. His face showed that he was being patient, but just barely. He was ready to stop her after a minute if she was terrible. He was ready with his critique. He would be gentler than usual because she was old, but he would still be honest. Margaret took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for a moment. She said a silent prayer. She asked for strength. She asked for courage. She thought about Robert watching her from heaven. She thought about the young girl she used to be, the girl who loved piano more than anything. Then she opened her eyes. She placed her hands on the keys. The piano was so much better than her keyboard at home. The keys were smooth and perfect. She could feel the quality of the instrument under her fingers. She was ready to begin. The whole concert hall held its breath. 500 people waited in silence. The young musicians at the side of the stage watched. Maestro Petrov watched. Everyone watched the old woman at the piano. Margaret knew that the next few minutes would be the most important of her life. She knew that everyone expected her to fail. She knew that they thought she was foolish for trying. But she also knew something they did not know. She knew that she had something special to share. She had lived 73 years. She had loved and lost. She had sacrificed and survived. All of that life, all of that feeling was about to come out through her music. Her bent arthritic fingers pressed down on the first keys. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and gentle. Margaret played slowly, carefully. She was not trying to show off. She was not trying to play the fastest or the loudest. She was just trying to share something beautiful. But before the music could really begin, there were things that needed to happen. Margaret needed to adjust the piano bench. When she first sat down, it was not quite right. It was too far from the piano. Her arms would get tired if she had to reach, so Margaret stood up again. Some people in the audience shifted in their seats. Was she giving up already? Was she too nervous to continue? But no, she was just moving the bench. She pulled it forward a few inches. The legs of the bench scraped against the wooden floor again. The sound echoed in the quiet hall. Maestro Petrov looked at his watch again. He did this in a way that everyone could see. He was showing his impatience. He sighed loudly. The microphone picked up his sigh. It came through the speakers. The message was clear. He thought this old woman was wasting everyone's time. Some people in the audience felt uncomfortable. They could see that the maestro was being rude. An elderly woman in the back row whispered to her husband, "He should be more kind." Her husband nodded in agreement, but others thought the maestro was right. This was a professional masterclass. It should be taken seriously. Old people who wanted to play piano should do it in their own homes, not on stage. Margaret sat down again. This time the bench felt right. She could reach the keys comfortably. But now she needed to adjust her sheet music. The pages had slipped a little when she stood up. She straightened them carefully. Her hands moved slowly because of the arthritis. Each small movement took effort. While she did this, Margaret could feel everyone watching her. She could feel their eyes on her back. She could feel their judgment. Some were curious. Some were annoyed. Some felt sorry for her, but they were all watching, all waiting. Margaret's heart was beating so fast. Her hands were shaking, not just from nervousness, but also from the arthritis. On cold days, her hands shook more. Today was a cold day. This morning, she had taken her medicine for the pain. She had soaked her hands in warm water. She had done her exercises to loosen the joints. But still, they shook a little. She placed her hands on the piano keys. They looked so old against the perfect white and black keys. The piano was young and beautiful. Her hands were old and damaged. It seemed like they did not match. It seemed like they did not belong together. Margaret looked at the keys, and suddenly she was not in the concert hall anymore. In her mind, she was somewhere else. She was in a different time. She was 12 years old again. In her memory, she saw the small music room in her old school. The walls were painted yellow, but the paint was peeling off in some places. There was one window with thin curtains. The room smelled like old books and floor polish. And in the corner of that room stood an old upright piano. That piano was not like this beautiful grand piano. That piano had scratches on it. Some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. It was out of tune. But to 12-year-old Margaret, it was the most wonderful thing in the world. She remembered Mrs. Patterson, her music teacher. Mrs. Patterson was a tall woman with gray hair and a bun. She wore long skirts and always smelled like lavender. She was strict but kind. She saw something special in Margaret. "You have a gift, child," Mrs. Patterson used to say. "Don't waste it. Practice every day. Music can take you far from this poor neighborhood. Music can give you a better life." Margaret had believed her. She had practiced every single day after school. While other children played outside, Margaret stayed in the music room. Her fingers would hurt from practicing. Sometimes she would stay so late that the janitor had to remind her to go home. But she loved it. She loved the feeling of the keys under her fingers. She loved the sound she could create. She loved how music made her feel. Mrs. Patterson taught her many pieces, simple ones at first, then harder ones. Margaret learned fast. She was a natural. Mrs. Patterson said she had good ears and sensitive hands. She said Margaret could feel the music in her soul. Margaret remembered the day everything changed. She came to school excited to practice. She had learned a new piece at home by listening to the radio. She wanted to show Mrs. Patterson, but when she got to the music room, she found her mother there. Her mother was crying. "Papa is very sick," her mother said. "He cannot work. We need your help at home. You cannot stay after school anymore. You need to help me take care of your brothers and sisters." Margaret felt her world breaking apart. "But Mama, Mrs. Patterson says I have talent. She says I could go to music school. She says, music school costs money," her mother said, wiping her tears. "We don't have money for food. How can we pay for music school? I'm sorry, Margaret. I know you love piano, but life is not fair. We must do what we must do." That was the last day Margaret played piano in the music room. Mrs. Patterson was sad to see her go. She gave Margaret some old sheet music to take home. "Don't forget what you learned," Mrs. Patterson said. "Maybe someday you can play again." But there was no piano at home. There was no time. There was no money. Margaret worked in the factory during the day. At night, she helped at home. The years passed. She met Robert. They fell in love. They got married when she was 22. Robert knew about her love for music. On their first anniversary, he surprised her. He had saved money and bought her a small keyboard. Not a real piano, but something she could practice on. Margaret cried with happiness. She played a little bit every week, when she had time. But then the babies came. First David, then Susan, then Michael, then the twins Lisa and Laura. 5 children in 8 years. There was no time for music. The keyboard sat in the corner, gathering dust. Sometimes Margaret would look at it and feel sad. But she pushed that sadness away. Her children needed her. That was more important than music. The children grew up. They had good lives. Margaret was proud of them. David became a teacher. Susan became a nurse. Michael worked in construction. The twins both went to college. They all had their own families now. They had their own lives. And then Robert got sick. The cancer came suddenly. One day he was fine. The next day he was in the hospital. The doctors tried everything, but nothing worked. For 6 months, Margaret sat by his hospital bed. She held his hand. She talked to him about their life together. She told him she loved him. One night, when Robert was very weak, he opened his eyes and looked at her. "Margaret," he whispered, "I want you to promise me something." "Anything," she said, holding his hand tighter. "Promise me you will play piano again. You gave up your dream for me, for our family. You worked so hard. You never complained. But now the children are grown. Now you have time. Promise me you will do it. Promise me you will make music again." Margaret was crying. "Robert, I'm too old. My hands don't work right anymore. I have arthritis. I can't play like I used to." "Promise me," he said again. His voice was weak but determined. "Do it for me. Do it for the young girl you used to be. Please, Margaret, promise." "I promise," she said through her tears. "I promise." 2 weeks later, Robert died. Margaret felt like part of her died too. The house was so empty without him. The silence was terrible. She did not know what to do with herself. Then one day, 3 months after the funeral, she remembered her promise. She went to the closet where she kept old things. She found the box of sheet music that Mrs. Patterson had given her 60 years ago. The papers were yellow and fragile. She opened them carefully. She found the old keyboard that Robert had bought her. It still worked. She plugged it in. She sat down and tried to play. Her fingers did not move right. They were stiff and painful. The notes came out wrong. She felt frustrated. Maybe she was too old. Maybe it was impossible. But she remembered her promise. So she kept trying. Every day she practiced for an hour. Some days her hands hurt so much that she cried. But she did not give up. Slowly, slowly, her fingers remembered. The music came back. Not perfectly. Not like when she was young. But it came back. Then she saw the announcement about Maestro Petrov's masterclass. She read it 3 times. She thought about it for a week. Finally, she decided to sign up. It cost $150. That was a lot of money for her. But she paid it. She was going to keep her promise to Robert. Now here she was, sitting at this beautiful piano about to play. She could still hear Maestro Petrov's cruel words in her head. Perhaps she is looking for a retirement home recital. The laughter of the audience still hurt her heart. But she was not going to let them stop her. She had come this far. She was going to play. Margaret took a deep breath. She placed her hands on the keys one more time. She felt the smooth surface under her fingers. She felt the weight of the keys. This was a good piano. It would help her play well. She closed her eyes again for just a moment. "This is for you, Robert," she whispered so quietly that only she could hear. "This is for you and for the little girl I used to be. This is for every dream that was put aside. This is for everyone who thinks it's too late. I'm going to show them it's never too late." She opened her eyes. She looked at her sheet music one more time. The piece she had chosen was special. It was not a famous piece that everyone knew. It was not a piece that would show off fast fingers or loud chords. Margaret's fingers touched the keys and pressed down. The first note came out clear and pure. Then the second note. Then the third. She began to play the nocturne. The piece started very softly, like a whisper. It was like someone telling a secret. The melody was gentle and sweet. Margaret's right hand played the melody while her left hand played soft chords underneath. The 2 hands worked together to create something beautiful. At first, people in the audience did not know what to think. They had expected her to be terrible. They had expected wrong notes and mistakes. They had expected to feel embarrassed for her. But that is not what they heard. What they heard was music. Real music. Not perfect music, but real music. There was something different about the way she played. Something that made you want to listen. Maestro Petrov had been looking at his watch. He had been thinking about what he would say to end this quickly. He had been ready to tell her gently that she should practice more at home before performing for others. But when the first notes came out, he looked up. His expression changed from boredom to surprise. The melody that Margaret played was simple but beautiful. Each note was clear. She was not playing fast, but she was playing with care. Every single note mattered to her. You could hear that in the music. You could feel it. Her fingers moved across the keys with a strange grace. Yes, they were old fingers. Yes, they were bent with arthritis. Yes, they could not move as fast as young fingers. But they knew where to go. They remembered. After 60 years, they still remembered. Margaret had practiced this piece every single day for 3 months. She had practiced it in the morning when her hands hurt less. She had practiced it at night when she was tired. She had practiced it until her fingers felt like they would fall off. She knew every single note by heart. She could play it in her sleep. But it was not just about knowing the notes. It was about feeling them. And Margaret felt every note deep in her heart. When she played the sad parts, she thought about losing Robert. When she played the hopeful parts, she thought about his love. When she played the gentle parts, she thought about holding her babies. The music was not just sounds. It was her life. The audience began to settle down. The whispers stopped. People who had been looking at their phones put them away. People who had been thinking about other things started to pay attention. There was something about this old woman's playing that made you listen. A young woman in the 5th row had been texting during the other performances. She thought this master class was boring, but when Margaret started playing, she stopped texting. She put her phone in her purse. She sat up straight and listened. She did not know why, but the music made her feel something. It made her think about her own grandmother who had died last year. An old man in the back row had been falling asleep. The concert hall was warm and the seats were comfortable. His eyes had been closing, but when Margaret's music reached him, he opened his eyes. He listened. The music reminded him of something from long ago. It reminded him of his youth, of his own lost dreams. The young musicians waiting at the side of the stage had different reactions. Some of them were shocked. They had thought this old woman would embarrass herself. They had thought she would prove that she did not belong here. But she was actually playing well. Not technically perfect, but well. A young man named James, who had played earlier, watched Margaret with wide eyes. He had played a very difficult piece by Liszt. He had played every note perfectly. Maestro Petrov had told him his technique was good, but his playing had no feeling. James had not understood what that meant. Now, listening to Margaret, he started to understand. She was not playing perfectly, but every note had feeling. Every note meant something. Maestro Petrov sat very still in his chair. He was listening carefully now. His arms were no longer crossed. He leaned forward a little. His face showed concentration. He was a professional. He could hear everything in her playing. He could hear the small technical mistakes. But he could also hear something else, something he had not heard in a long time. The piece that Margaret played was not a famous piece. Most people in the audience had never heard it before. But Maestro Petrov knew it well. He had learned this same nocturne when he was a young student in Russia, many years ago. His own teacher, an old woman named Madame Kozlov, had taught it to him. That was before he became famous. Before he became cold and critical. Before he forgot why he loved music in the first place. As Margaret played, the music began to grow a little. It got a tiny bit louder. The melody rose and fell like waves. There were moments of beauty that made you hold your breath. There were moments of sadness that made you want to cry. Margaret's hands moved across the keys, and something magical was happening. The arthritis that made her fingers stiff and painful seemed to fade away. When she played music, the pain became less. The music took over. Her body remembered what to do. Muscle memory from 60 years ago was waking up. She played a difficult passage where the right hand had to play fast notes while the left hand played slow ones. Her right hand stumbled a little. The notes were not perfectly even. A young student would have been embarrassed by this small mistake. But Margaret just kept going. She did not stop. She did not apologize. She just continued with the music. And here was the strange thing. The small imperfection did not ruin the music. In fact, it made the music more human. It made it more real. It was like looking at a person's face and seeing laugh lines and wrinkles. Those lines tell a story. They show that the person has lived and smiled and cried. Margaret's imperfect playing told a story too. The melody came to a gentle section. This was Margaret's favorite part of the piece. The right hand played a simple tune that went up and down like a bird flying. The left hand played soft chords that supported the melody like arms holding a child. This part always made Margaret think about when her children were babies. She would hold them and sing to them. She would rock them to sleep. Those were hard times, but they were also beautiful times. As she played this section, a tear rolled down Margaret's cheek. She did not wipe it away. She could not stop playing to wipe it away. The tear just rolled down and dropped onto her dress. More tears followed, but her fingers kept playing. The music kept flowing. Some people in the audience saw her crying. They felt their own eyes getting wet. There was something about seeing this old woman cry while she played that touched their hearts. She was not crying from embarrassment. She was not crying from fear. She was crying because the music was so beautiful and because it meant so much to her. A middle-aged woman in the audience named Patricia started crying too. She did not know why. She did not know this old woman, but the music spoke to something deep inside her. Patricia had given up her own dream of being a painter when she got married. She had a good life, a good husband, good children, but sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had kept painting. Listening to Margaret play, she felt all those old feelings come back. The young musicians at the side of the stage were silent now. Even the ones who had laughed at Margaret earlier were not laughing now. They were listening, really listening. Some of them were learning something important, even though they did not fully understand it yet. A young woman named Emily, who had played very technically perfect earlier, felt something strange in her chest. She had practiced her piece for months. She had made sure every note was exactly right. Maestro Petrov had told her she played like a computer. She had been hurt by his words. Now, listening to Margaret, she understood what he meant. Margaret's playing was not perfect, but it was alive. It had a heartbeat. Emily's playing had been perfect but dead. Maestro Petrov's face showed many emotions. Surprise, respect, and something else. Something that looked like pain. Listening to Margaret play this simple nocturne was bringing back memories he had tried to forget. He remembered why he had fallen in love with piano as a child. He remembered playing for the joy of it, not for competitions or critics or fame. When he was 7 years old in Moscow, his mother had taken him to his first piano lesson. His teacher, Madame Kozlov, was strict, but she loved music more than anything. She taught him that music was not about showing off. It was not about being better than others. It was about expressing the human soul. It was about sharing feelings that words could not express. Young Victor had loved those lessons. He practiced because he wanted to, not because he had to. Music was his friend. It was his joy. But then he got older. He won competitions. People told him he was a genius. He went to the best music schools. He performed in the best concert halls. Success came to him easily, but somewhere along the way he changed. Music became about winning. It became about being perfect. It became about impressing people. The joy disappeared. The love disappeared. He became a machine that played notes perfectly but felt nothing. And he taught others to be machines too. Now sitting in this concert hall listening to this old woman play, Maestro Petrov felt something crack inside his chest. It was like ice breaking. It was like waking up from a long sleep. He felt something he had not felt in years. He felt moved by music. Really moved. Not impressed by technique. Not judging the performance. Just feeling the beauty of it. Margaret played on. The music rose to a moment of beauty. As Margaret continued playing, something remarkable was happening in the concert hall. The atmosphere was changing. The air itself seemed different. What had started as curiosity was turning into something deeper. People were not just listening anymore. They were feeling. The music swelled and grew. Margaret's playing became more confident. Her fingers found their rhythm. Yes, there were still small technical imperfections. A note here was not quite perfect. A chord there was not perfectly balanced. But these tiny flaws did not matter. In fact, they added something human to the music. They made it real. Maestro Petrov noticed every single technical error. His trained ear caught everything. But for the first time in many years, he did not care about the technical errors. He was hearing something much more important. He was hearing a human soul speaking through music. He was hearing truth. The piece had different sections. Some parts were sad and slow. Some parts were hopeful and gentle. Some parts were mysterious and deep. Margaret played each section with understanding. She knew what each part meant. She had lived long enough to understand sadness, She had loved enough to understand hope. She had lost enough to understand mystery. In the sad parts, Margaret thought about all the losses in her life. She thought about her father dying when she was young. She thought about giving up her dreams. She thought about the hard years of working and raising children with never enough money. She thought about watching Robert die. All of that pain, all of that grief came through in the music. But it was not just pain. It was pain that had been survived. It was pain that had made her stronger. In the hopeful parts, she thought about the good things. She thought about her wedding day. She thought about holding each of her babies for the first time. She thought about her children's graduations. She thought about becoming a grandmother. She thought about Robert's smile. She thought about the promise she had made to him, and how she was keeping it right now. All of that love, all of that joy came through in the music. The audience felt all of these emotions. They did not know the details of Margaret's life. They did not know about Robert or her children or her lost dreams, but they felt the emotions. Music has a special power. It can make you feel things without words. It can tell stories without speaking. A young man in the audience named Thomas was completely absorbed in the music. Thomas was 25 years old. He worked in a bank and hated his job. He had wanted to be a writer, but his parents told him to get a practical job. He had listened to them. Now he was miserable every day. Listening to Margaret play, he thought about his own life. He thought about his own lost dreams. Tears filled his eyes. He made a decision right there in that moment. He would start writing again. He would not waste his whole life being unhappy. An elderly couple sat holding hands in the middle of the audience. The husband's name was George and the wife's name was Helen. They had been married for 52 years. Life had not always been easy, but they had stayed together. Listening to Margaret's music, they squeezed each other's hands tighter. They thought about all the years they had shared. They felt grateful. The music reminded them that their love was precious and rare. A teenage girl named Sophia sat with her mother. Sophia was 16 and she studied piano. She was good at it, but lately she had been wondering if she should quit. Piano took so much time. Her friends were always busy with other things. She felt left out. She had been thinking about telling her teacher she wanted to stop. But listening to Margaret play, she felt something change inside her. She saw what music could be. She saw that it was not just about practicing scales and playing for judges. It was about expressing yourself. It was about having something beautiful in your life. She decided she would not quit after all. The young musicians waiting at the side of the stage were going through their own transformations. They had come here today thinking they would learn about technique. They thought Maestro Petrov would teach them how to play faster or more accurately. But they were learning something completely different. They were learning that technique without soul is empty. They were learning that perfection without feeling is worthless. James, the young man who had played the Liszt piece earlier, stood with tears running down his face. He was not ashamed of crying. He was 23 years old and had studied piano since he was 4. He had won competitions. He had played in good concert halls. Teachers always praised his technique, but Maestro Petrov's words earlier had cut deep. You play like a machine. James had practiced the Liszt piece for 6 months. He could play every single note perfectly, but he had never asked himself what the piece meant. He had never thought about the emotions in it. Now, watching Margaret, he understood. Music was not about impressing people with difficult techniques. It was about communication. It was about touching hearts. Emily, the young woman who had played perfectly but coldly earlier, felt like she was seeing music for the first time. She had spent her whole life trying to be perfect. Her parents were strict. They made her practice 4 hours every day. They hired the most expensive teachers. They pushed her to win competitions. Emily had become an excellent player, but she had never enjoyed it. Music was not fun for her. It was work. It was pressure. It was stress. But watching Margaret play with such obvious love, Emily felt something wake up inside her. Maybe music could be different. Maybe it could be joy instead of pressure. Maestro Petrov sat very still. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. Inside his chest, his heart was pounding. He felt like he was being pulled back in time. He remembered being a young boy in Moscow. He remembered his first teacher, Madame Kozlov. She was an old woman, probably about Margaret's age now. She had lived through wars and revolutions. She had lost her husband and her son. But when she played piano, all of that suffering turned into beauty. Madame Kozlov used to tell young Victor, "Music is not about your fingers. It is about your heart. If you play with only your fingers, you make noise. If you play with your heart, you make magic." Victor had believed her then. But somewhere along his journey to fame, he had forgotten those words. He had started to think that technical perfection was everything. He had become harsh and critical. He had made young musicians cry with his cutting words. He had lost the magic. Now, listening to Margaret, he remembered. He remembered what Madame Kozlov had tried to teach him. He remembered what music was supposed to be. And he felt ashamed. He felt ashamed of the way he had treated people. He felt ashamed of the way he had laughed at Margaret just minutes ago. He felt ashamed of how he had forgotten the heart of music. The music continued to flow from the piano. Margaret was in her own world now. She barely remembered that there were 500 people watching her. She barely remembered that she was on a stage. She was just playing. She was just feeling. The piano and she were one. The music and she were one. Her tears continued to fall. Her face was wet with them. But she was not sad. Well, she was sad and happy at the same time. That is what the music was about. Life was both sad and happy. Life was both painful and beautiful. Margaret had lived long enough to know this truth deeply. As she played, Margaret felt Robert's presence. She knew he was not really there. She knew he was dead and gone. But in her heart, she felt him. She felt him listening to her play. She felt him proud of her. She imagined him smiling his gentle smile. "You did it, Margaret," she imagined him saying. "You kept your promise. I knew you would." The piece was moving toward its ending now. The melody became softer and softer. It was like watching the sun set slowly. It was like watching a candle burn down gently. The music was saying goodbye, but it was a peaceful goodbye. It was saying that all things must end, but that is okay. Endings are part of life. Maestro Petrov felt something wet on his cheek. He raised his hand to his face and touched it. His fingers came away wet. He was crying. He, Victor Petrov, the great maestro who never showed emotion, was crying. He had not cried in public since he was a child. He had trained himself to be cold and controlled. Emotions were weakness, he had thought. But now the dam was breaking. The ice was melting. The tears came faster. He tried to stop them. He tried to wipe them away quickly before anyone saw. But it was too late. His assistant standing next to him had already seen. Some people in the front rows had already seen. But he found that he did not care. Let them see. Let them see that he was human. Let them see that music could still move him. Other people in the audience were crying too now. Not everyone, but many. Some cried quietly with tears just rolling down their faces. Some cried harder, with their shoulders shaking. Some tried to hide their tears. Some did not bother to hide them. The music had opened something in all of them. It had touched places they usually kept locked away. A businessman in a suit who had come to the master class only because his wife made him come, found himself crying. He could not remember the last time he had cried. Maybe at his father's funeral 10 years ago. But this music made him think about his father. His father had loved music. The businessman had been too busy with work to visit his father much in the last years of his life. He regretted that now. The music made him feel that regret deeply. Margaret sat at the piano with her hands still resting on the keys. Her eyes remained closed. The tears continued to flow down her wrinkled cheeks. They dropped onto her simple flower dress, making small dark spots on the fabric. But she did not care. She did not even notice. In this moment, she was feeling everything all at once. She felt the joy of keeping her promise to Robert. She felt the pain of missing him. She felt proud of herself for being brave enough to come here today. She felt the love she had for music that had never died, even through 60 years of silence. All of these feelings mixed together in her heart until it felt like her heart might burst. The silence in the concert hall continued. It was a heavy silence full of emotion. Everyone was still processing what they had just heard. They were trying to find words for what they felt, but there were no words. Some experiences are too big for words. Some moments can only be felt. Margaret finally opened her eyes. She looked down at her hands on the piano keys. These old hands, these bent, arthritic, wrinkled hands, they had just made something beautiful. They had just shared her story with 500 strangers. They had just proved that age does not matter when you have something important to say. She thought about all the things these hands had done in 73 years. They had worked in factories. They had washed dishes and clothes and floors. They had changed thousands of diapers. They had cooked thousands of meals. They had wiped away children's tears. They had held her husband's hand as he died. They had lived a full, hard, beautiful life. But they had also played piano. Long ago, they had played piano with skill and love. And today, after all these years, they had played again, not perfectly, not with the speed and strength of youth, but with something more valuable, with truth, with feeling, with a lifetime of love and loss flowing through every note. Margaret slowly lifted her hands from the keys. She placed them in her lap. She looked at her worn sheet music, the yellow pages with the pencil marks from long ago. She had played every single note. She had not given up. She had not run away when people laughed at her. She had stayed and she had played and she had given everything she had. More tears came. She could not stop them. She did not try to stop them. She was crying for so many reasons. She was crying for the young girl she had been, the girl who had loved music so much. She was crying for all the years she could not play. She was crying for Robert and how much she missed him. She was crying because keeping this promise to him made her feel close to him again. But she was also crying with joy. Joy that she had found the courage to do this. Joy that her fingers still remembered how to play. Joy that she could still feel music so deeply. Joy that at 73 years old, she was still alive and still able to create something beautiful. The audience watched her cry. Many of them were crying too. They understood that they were not just watching someone cry from nervousness or embarrassment. They were watching someone release a lifetime of held emotions. They were watching someone be completely honest and vulnerable. In a world where people usually hide their feelings, this was shocking and moving. Margaret thought about her children. She wished they were here to see this. David, Susan, Michael, Lisa, and Laura. She had given so much to them. She had worked so hard to give them good lives. She had sacrificed her dreams for them. She had never regretted it. They were good people and she was proud of them. But sometimes, just sometimes, she had felt like she lost herself in being a mother. She had felt like Margaret the person disappeared and only Margaret the mother existed. Today, playing this piano, she had found herself again. She had remembered who she was before she was a wife and mother. She had remembered the girl who dreamed of being a pianist. That girl was still inside her. That girl had just played piano on a big stage in front of hundreds of people. That girl was still alive. Margaret thought about all the other people like her. All the people who had dreams when they were young. All the people who had to put those dreams aside because of life and responsibility and hardship. All the mothers who gave up careers for children. All the fathers who worked jobs they hated to pay bills. All the people who wanted to paint or sing or write or dance but never had time. She played for all of them too. She played to show them that it is never too late. Dreams do not die. They just wait. She remembered a moment from 2 months ago. She had been practicing on her old keyboard at home. Her daughter Susan had come to visit. Susan heard her playing and came into the room. She watched her mother play for a minute, then said, "Mom, that's nice, but are you sure you want to do this masterclass thing? You might embarrass yourself. Those are professional musicians. You haven't played seriously in 60 years. Margaret had felt hurt by Susan's words, but she understood. Susan was trying to protect her. Susan did not want her mother to be laughed at or rejected. But Margaret had made up her mind. She had signed up. She was going to do it. Now sitting at this piano having just played her piece, she was glad she had not listened to Susan's fears. Sometimes you have to risk embarrassment to do something important. The tears kept flowing. Margaret's whole body was shaking a little with the emotion. It was too much to hold inside. She had been strong for so long. Strong through poverty. Strong through hard work. Strong through raising 5 children mostly alone because Robert worked 2 jobs. Strong through losing Robert. She had always had to be strong for other people. But right now, in this moment, she could just feel. She could just be human. She could just cry. In the audience, people were having their own emotional moments. The young woman Sophia who studied piano was crying hard. She turned to her mother and whispered, "I want to play like that someday. Not technically perfect, but real. I want to play real music." Her mother hugged her and cried too. The old couple, George and Helen, held each other. George whispered to Helen, "Remember when we first met? You were playing piano at that church social. I fell in love with you because of the way you played. You had that same feeling that this lady has." Helen nodded, remembering. She had not played piano in 40 years. Maybe she would start again. The businessman in the suit covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. People sitting near him looked at him with concern, but they understood. The music had broken something open in him. All the stress and pressure and sadness he usually kept hidden was coming out. His wife, sitting next to him, put her arm around him. She was crying too. They had not really talked, really connected, in years. Maybe this would be a new start for them. Thomas, the young man who worked at the bank, wiped his eyes and made a decision. Tomorrow he would start writing again. He would wake up early before work and write for an hour. He did not care if it was good or bad. He would just write. Margaret had taught him that it was not about being perfect. It was about doing what you love. Life was too short to be miserable. The young musicians at the side of the stage were quiet. Some of them were crying. Some of them just stared with wide eyes. They were learning the most important lesson of their lives. Music school had taught them about technique and theory. But Margaret was teaching them about heart. She was teaching them that all the technique in the world means nothing if you have nothing to say. James, who had played the list earlier, felt like his whole understanding of music had changed in 15 minutes. He looked at his own hands. Young hands, strong hands, hands that could play very fast and very accurately. But could they play with feeling? Could they tell a story? He was not sure. He realized he had a lot to learn. Not about technique. About life. About being human. He needed to live more before his playing would mean anything. Emily, the young woman with the strict parents, felt something like relief. She had always felt guilty that she did not enjoy playing piano. She had thought there was something wrong with her. But now she understood. She did not enjoy it because she had been taught to play for judges and competitions. She had been taught to play for other people's approval. She had never been taught to play for herself, to express herself. Maybe she could learn to do that. Maybe she could find joy in music after all. Maestro Victor Petrov was still crying. The tears ran down his face freely now. He did not try to hide them. He did not care who saw. He was experiencing something like grief. He was grieving for all the years he had wasted being cold and critical. He was grieving for all the young musicians he had hurt with his harsh words. He was grieving for the joy he had lost. But he also felt something like hope. If this old woman could rediscover her love of music after 60 years, maybe he could too. Maybe it was not too late for him to change. Maybe he could become the kind of teacher Madame Kozlov had been. Kind but honest, strict but loving, demanding but understanding. Maybe he could help young musicians find their hearts instead of just perfecting their technique. Margaret finally took a deep breath and tried to compose herself. She used her hand to wipe the tears from her face. But more tears just came. It was okay. She took another breath. She looked at the piano one more time. This beautiful instrument that had helped her tell her story. She placed her hand gently on it, almost like petting a beloved animal. "Thank you," she whispered to the piano. The silence in the concert hall seemed to stretch forever. Margaret stood on the stage feeling exposed and vulnerable. She could feel everyone's eyes on her. She could see Maestro Petrov staring at her with tears on his face. She did not understand what was happening. Why was he crying? Why was no one saying anything? Then slowly something began to happen. Maestro Victor Petrov stood up. He stood up from his chair. This had not happened for any of the other students. Usually he stayed seated and gave his comments from his chair. But now he was standing. His legs seemed shaky, like he might fall. He steadied himself by holding onto the chair for a moment. He brought his hands together. Slowly at first, one clap, then another. Then another. He was applauding. The great Maestro Victor Petrov, who was known for being so hard to please, who rarely gave compliments, who made young musicians cry with his criticism, was applauding an old woman who had just played with imperfect technique. But he was not just applauding politely. His clapping grew stronger, more passionate. His hands came together hard, making loud clapping sounds. Tears continued to roll down his face. He did not wipe them away. He just clapped and clapped, looking directly at Margaret with an expression of awe and respect and something like love. For a moment, the audience did not know what to do. They were shocked. They had never seen the maestro act like this. Some people started to stand up slowly, joining his applause. Then more people stood, then more. Like a wave moving through the hall, everyone began to rise from their seats. Everyone began to clap. Within seconds, the entire concert hall was on its feet. 500 people standing and applauding. The sound of clapping filled the hall, echoing off the walls. It grew louder and louder. People were not just clapping politely. They were clapping with real feeling. They were clapping to show respect. They were clapping to show gratitude. They were clapping because Margaret's music had moved them deeply. Margaret stood on the stage in shock. She could not believe what was happening. She had expected Maestro Petrov to be kind but dismissive. She had expected him to say something like, "Thank you for playing. You have some natural feeling, but you need to work on your technique. Perhaps take some lessons before performing in public again." She had expected polite applause from the audience, and then it would be over. But this standing ovation, this passionate applause that went on and on, this was beyond anything she had imagined. Her hands went to her mouth. Fresh tears spilled from her eyes. She could not stop crying. But now they were tears of overwhelming joy and disbelief. The applause continued. It did not stop after 10 seconds like normal applause. It did not stop after 30 seconds. It went on for a full minute. Then 2 minutes. Then 3 minutes. People kept clapping. Some people were whistling and cheering. Some were wiping their own tears while clapping. The sound was thunderous. Margaret tried to bow to thank them, but her body was shaking so much that she nearly fell. She steadied herself. She bowed her head, tears falling onto the stage floor. When she looked up again, the applause was still going. She put her hand over her heart, trying to show them how much this meant to her. But there were no words. There were no gestures big enough to express what she felt. The young musicians at the side of the stage were clapping too. Even the ones who had been skeptical of her were clapping hard. James was clapping with tears running down his face. Emily was clapping and smiling through her tears. All of them understood that they had witnessed something special, something they would remember for the rest of their lives. In the audience, people were having powerful reactions. The young woman Sophia was clapping so hard her hands hurt. She was jumping up and down. She turned to her mother and shouted over the noise, "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Her mother nodded, unable to speak because she was crying. The old couple, George and Helen, clapped with their arms around each other. They were both crying. They had been married for 52 years and had seen many concerts. But they had never seen anything like this. George whispered to Helen, "This is what music is supposed to be." Helen nodded and held him tighter. The businessman who had been so moved during the performance was clapping hard. His wife looked at him with surprise. She had not seen him show this much emotion in years. He looked different. His face was softer. The stress and hardness that usually showed on his face was gone. He looked younger. He looked alive. She took his hand and squeezed it. Maybe something had changed in him. Maybe this moment would change their life together. Thomas, the young man who worked at the bank, was clapping and crying and laughing all at the same time. He felt like he had been given permission to live his real life. He felt like Margaret had shown him that it was okay to go after what you really wanted. It was okay to take risks. It was okay to be brave. He would start writing tomorrow. He would not waste any more time being unhappy. After 4 minutes, the applause started to fade a little. Not because people wanted to stop, but because their hands were getting tired. But then Maestro Petrov started moving. He walked from his chair toward the stage. The audience watched him. What was he going to do? He climbed the steps to the stage slowly. His legs still seemed weak. He walked across the stage toward Margaret. She watched him come with wide eyes. She did not know what he was going to do. Was he angry? Was he going to tell her something? When he reached her, he stood in front of her for a moment. They looked at each other, this famous, powerful man and this simple old woman. His face was still wet with tears. His eyes were red. He looked broken open, like something hard inside him had cracked apart. Then, to everyone's shock, Maestro Petrov reached out and took Margaret's hands in his own. Her old, bent, arthritic hands. He held them gently like they were precious and fragile. He looked down at her hands for a moment. Then he looked at her face. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was thick with emotion. The microphone on his shirt picked up his words so everyone could hear. "Please forgive me." Margaret was confused. "Forgive you? For what?" "For laughing at you," he said. His voice broke. "For making that cruel joke. For being so arrogant and dismissive. I am so sorry. You came here with courage and love, and I mocked you. I am ashamed." More tears rolled down his face. His hand squeezed hers gently. Margaret felt her own tears start again. She shook her head. "It is okay," she said softly. "You did not know." "No," he said firmly. "It is not okay. I should have known. I should have treated you with respect from the beginning, regardless of how you played. But more than that," he paused, trying to find the right words. "You have reminded me of something I lost long ago. You have reminded me what music really is." He let go of one of her hands and touched his chest over his heart. "I have spent 30 years teaching people about technique, about precision, about perfection. I became hard and cold. I forgot why I fell in love with music in the first place. I forgot that music is not about impressing people. It is not about being the best. It is about truth. It is about the human soul. It is about sharing who you really are." The audience listened in complete silence. No one moved. No one made a sound. They were witnessing something extraordinary. The famous Maestro, known for his pride and his harsh criticism, was breaking down. He was showing his own vulnerability. He was admitting he was wrong. "You played with technical imperfections," he continued, his voice getting stronger. "Yes, I heard every one of them. But you played with something much more important. You played with your whole heart. You played with a lifetime of experience. You played with love and loss and hope and pain. You played with truth, and that is worth more than 1,000 perfect performances." He paused and wiped his eyes with his free hand. Then he looked at Margaret again. "You have taught this old teacher a lesson he desperately needed. You have reminded me that technical mastery without soul is just noise, but music played with a lifetime of love. Music played with complete honesty that can change hearts, that can change lives. You have changed mine today." Margaret was crying so hard now she could barely breathe. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that her simple playing could affect someone like Maestro Petrov. She had just wanted to keep her promise to Robert. She had just wanted to prove to herself that she could still play. But she had done something much bigger. She had reminded a great artist of why art matters. "Thank you," Maestro Petrov said, squeezing her hands one more time. "Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for showing all of us what music can be. You are a true artist." Then he did something that shocked everyone even more. He bowed to her. Maestro Victor Petrov, one of the greatest pianists in the world, bowed deeply to Margaret Chen, a 73-year-old grandmother from a simple neighborhood. He bowed to her with respect. He bowed to her with gratitude. He bowed to honor what she had shared. When he straightened up, the audience exploded with applause again. This time it was even louder than before. People were cheering. Some were shouting. The young musicians at the side of the stage were crying and clapping. This moment would be talked about for years. This moment would be remembered. Margaret did not know what to do. She bowed back to Maestro Petrov, though her bow was small and humble. Then she turned and bowed to the audience. The applause grew even louder. People were standing on their chairs. They were waving their programs in the air. The love and respect in that room was almost physical. You could feel it like warmth. Maestro Petrov stepped back and continued applauding Margaret. He clapped for her along with everyone else. His face showed pride and joy. He looked at her like a teacher looks at a student who has just taught him something profound. He looked at her with love. After 5 full minutes of applause, it finally began to fade. People sat down slowly. The concert hall became quieter, but the energy was still there. The emotion was still in the air. Everyone was changed. No one would leave this hall the same as when they entered. Margaret walked slowly off the stage. Her whole body was shaking. She felt exhausted, like she had run a marathon, but she also felt lighter than she had in years. She felt free. She felt like she had finally done something just for herself. Not for her children, not for her husband, not for anyone else. For herself, for the young girl she used to be, for her own soul. When she reached the side of the stage, the young musicians surrounded her. They wanted to talk to her. They wanted to touch her hand. They wanted to thank her. Emily hugged her and whispered, "You showed me what I want to become." James shook her hand and said, "I will never forget this, never." Other students said similar things, their voices full of emotion and respect. Margaret was overwhelmed. She had come here expecting to be judged and criticized. She had come here expecting to feel small and inadequate. Instead, she was being celebrated. She was being honored. It was too much to process. Her mind could not fully understand what had just happened. Someone from the concert hall staff brought her a chair. She sat down gratefully. Her legs were weak. Her whole body was tired. but her heart was full, fuller than it had been since Robert died. She sat there while the master class continued. Other students played. Maestro Petrov gave them feedback. But everything felt different now. The whole atmosphere had changed. The maestro was gentler. He smiled more. He encouraged more. He had been transformed. During the break, people from the audience came looking for Margaret. They wanted to meet her. They wanted to tell her how her music had affected them. The businessman told her she had made him cry for the first time in 10 years. The young mother told her she felt understood. Sophia, the teenage piano student, asked if Margaret would give her lessons. Margaret was stunned. Her? Give lessons? She had never thought of herself as a teacher. But she smiled and said she would think about it. One woman, about 50 years old, came to Margaret with tears in her eyes. "I gave up painting when I got married 30 years ago," she said. "My husband did not think it was practical. I listened to him. But today, watching you, listening to you play, I decided I am going to paint again. I am going to buy paints tomorrow. Thank you for showing me it is not too late." Margaret hugged this woman. They cried together. Two women who had given up their dreams. Two women who were finding them again. It was never too late. It was never ever too late. As the master class ended and people began to leave, Margaret sat quietly. She was tired but peaceful. She looked at her old sheet music that she still held, the yellow pages with pencil marks from 60 years ago. These pages had waited for her. They had waited patiently for her to come back. And she had come back. Finally, she had come back. She thought about Robert. She closed her eyes and imagined him sitting next to her. She imagined him putting his arm around her. She imagined him saying, "I am so proud of you, Margaret. You did it. You kept your promise. And you did something wonderful. You reminded people that dreams matter, that art matters, that it is never too late to be who you really are." Margaret smiled through her tears. "I did it, Robert," she whispered. "I really did it." 3 days after the master class, Margaret was at home making tea in her small kitchen. Her hands still ached a little from playing. The arthritis was always worse after she used her fingers a lot, but it was a good ache. It reminded her of what she had done. It reminded her of that amazing day. She still could not quite believe it had happened. Sometimes she thought maybe she had dreamed it. But then she would remember the feeling of the piano keys under her fingers. She would remember the sound of the applause. She would remember Maestro Petrov's tears and his words. "You are a true artist." It had been real. It had really happened. Her phone rang. It was her daughter, Susan. "Mom, have you been online today?" Susan asked. She sounded excited. "No, dear. You know I do not use the computer much." "Why?" "Mom, you are famous. Someone recorded your performance and put it on the internet. The video has been watched by millions of people." "Millions, Mom. Everyone is talking about you." Margaret sat down feeling dizzy. "What? I do not understand." "What video?" Susan explained. Someone in the audience had recorded Margaret's performance on their phone. They had posted it online with the title, "73-year-old grandmother brings famous pianist to tears." The video had spread rapidly. First hundreds of people watched it. Then thousands. Then millions. People all over the world were watching Margaret play piano. They were watching Maestro Petrov cry. They were watching him apologize to her and bow to her. The video had touched people everywhere. Comments came from every country. People wrote about how Margaret inspired them, how she made them want to pursue their own forgotten dreams, how she reminded them that age is just a number, how she proved that it is never too late to do what you love. Margaret did not know what to say. She had not wanted to be famous. She had just wanted to play piano. She had just wanted to keep her promise to Robert. But now millions of people knew her story. Millions of people had been moved by her music. Over the next few days, many things happened. News reporters wanted to interview Margaret. Television shows wanted her to come on and play. Newspapers wrote articles about her. They called her the grandmother who reminded the world what music means. They called her an inspiration for everyone who gave up their dreams. Margaret was invited to play at other concerts. Music schools wanted her to come speak to their students. Community centers asked her to teach piano classes. It was overwhelming. Margaret was just a simple woman. She was not used to attention. She was not used to being special. But people insisted she was special. They insisted her story mattered. The most surprising call came from Maestro Viktor Petrov himself. He called her at home one evening. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "I hope I am not bothering you. I wanted to talk to you about something important." "Of course, Maestro," Margaret said, still feeling shy around this famous man. "Please, call me Victor," he said. "I've been thinking a lot since that day. You changed something in me. You reminded me why I became a musician. I've decided to change how I teach. I want to focus less on technical perfection and more on helping students find their own voice, their own truth." "The way you did," he paused. "I am starting a new program. It is for adult students who gave up music when they were young, people like you who had to put their dreams aside for practical reasons. I want to help them come back to music. And I would like you to help me. I would like you to teach with me. Your story will inspire them. Your playing will show them it is possible." Margaret was shocked. "But Victor, I am not a professional teacher. I do not have degrees or certificates. I am just an old woman who plays piano." "You are much more than that," Victor said firmly. "You have something that cannot be taught in music schools. You have lived. You have suffered. You have loved. You have sacrificed. And you have survived. That life experience makes you the perfect teacher for adults who have their own life experiences. Please think about it." Margaret did think about it. She thought about it for several days. It scared her. Teaching other people, her, but it also excited her. She thought about all the people like her. People who had dreams when they were young. People who had to give up those dreams. People who thought it was too late. She could help them. She could show them it was not too late. She called Victor back and said yes. She would teach with him. Together they created a program called Second Chances. It was for adults over 40 who wanted to return to music. The program became very popular. People came from all over the country to study. Some were retired. Some were still working. All of them had given up music years ago. All of them wanted to try again. Margaret taught them with patience and understanding. She knew what it felt like to have fingers that did not work like they used to. She knew what it felt like to be scared and embarrassed. She knew what it felt like to think you were too old. She helped her students work through these feelings. She helped them remember why they loved music in the first place. One of her first students was Patricia, the middle-aged woman who had wanted to be a painter. Patricia decided to try music instead. She had always wanted to learn piano. Margaret taught her. Patricia was nervous at first. Her fingers were stiff. She made many mistakes, but Margaret was patient. "It is not about being perfect," Margaret would say. "It is about expressing yourself. It is about joy. Just feel the music and let it come out." Patricia bloomed under Margaret's teaching. She learned to play simple pieces. She would never be a concert pianist. But that did not matter. She played for herself. She played for joy. That was enough. More than enough. Another student was a man named Robert. Yes, his name was Robert, just like Margaret's husband. This Robert was 65 years old. He had played violin when he was young. He had been quite good, but his father told him music was a waste of time. His father made him study business. Robert became a successful businessman. He made a lot of money, but he was never happy. After he retired, he found an old violin in his attic. He decided to try playing again. He joined Victor's program, but he worked with Margaret. "I feel like I wasted my life," Robert told Margaret one day. "I did what my father wanted. I was successful in business, but I was never happy. Music was my love. I should have followed my love." Margaret understood his pain, but she told him, "You did not waste your life. You lived the life you needed to live. You learned things, you grew. Yes, you gave up music, but now you have it back. You have many years left. You can spend them playing violin. It is not too late. It is never too late," Robert cried. Then he smiled. He picked up his violin and played. The sound was not perfect, but it was real. It was honest. It was beautiful. Margaret's own children finally saw the video of her performance. They called her amazed. David said, "Mom, I never knew you could play like that. Why did you never tell us?" Margaret explained that she had given up piano when she was young. She had been too busy raising them to play. They felt guilty at first, but Margaret stopped them. "I do not regret it," she said firmly. "You children were my joy. You still are. I made my choices. I am happy with them. But now I have this second chance, and I am grateful. Her grandchildren thought she was amazing. They bragged to their friends. My grandma is famous. She has millions of views online. They asked her to teach them piano. Margaret laughed and said yes. She started giving her grandchildren lessons. It was special to share music with them. She was passing on something important, not just piano skills, but a love of art, a belief that beauty matters, a knowledge that it is never too late to pursue what you love. Maestro Viktor Petrov changed too. He was still a great pianist. He still knew more about music than almost anyone in the world. But he was different now. He was kinder. He smiled more. When he taught, he still pointed out technical errors. But he also asked students, what are you trying to express? What story are you telling? What do you feel? He helped them find their own voices instead of just copying what others did. Other musicians noticed the change in him. Some liked it. Some thought he had gone soft. But most respected him more. They saw that he had grown. He had become not just a great pianist, but a great teacher, a whole teacher, one who taught both technique and heart. Victor and Margaret became friends. They would have tea together sometimes and talk about music and life. Victor told her about his childhood in Russia, about Madame Kozlov, his first teacher who had loved music so purely, about how he had forgotten her lessons over the years, about how Margaret had reminded him. You gave me a gift that day, Victor told her. You gave me back my love of music. I had lost it. I was just going through motions, playing perfectly but feeling nothing, teaching harshly but helping no one truly grow. You showed me the way back. I will never forget that, Margaret smiled. You gave me a gift too. You could have asked me to leave the stage that day. You could have been cruel. But you were humble enough to change your mind. You were brave enough to admit you were wrong. You were big enough to learn from an old woman. That takes greatness. The video of Margaret's performance continued to spread. It was shared on social media again and again. People wrote articles about it. It was shown on news programs. Psychologists talked about what it meant. They said it showed that people need to pursue their passions at any age. They said it showed that vulnerability and authenticity matter more than perfection. They said it showed that art has the power to transform both the artist and the audience. Schools started using the video in their classes. Teachers showed it to students to teach lessons about courage, about following your dreams, about the importance of art. Students wrote essays about Margaret. Many of them said she inspired them. She made them think about what really mattered in life. Old people especially connected with Margaret's story. In nursing homes and retirement communities all over the world, people watched her video. They cried. They remembered their own lost dreams. Some of them decided to try again. A man in Japan who had given up painting 40 years ago bought new paints. A woman in Brazil who had loved singing joined a choir. A man in Canada who had wanted to write poetry started writing again. Margaret's story gave them permission. It gave them hope. Margaret received thousands of letters and emails. People wrote to thank her. They told her their own stories. They told her how she had changed their lives. Margaret tried to answer as many as she could. She wanted people to know that she understood. She wanted them to know that they could do it too. They could pursue their dreams. Age did not matter. It was never ever too late. 1 year after the masterclass, Victor organized a special concert. It was called Second Chances, a celebration. All of the adult students from the program performed. Patricia played a simple piece on piano. Robert played his violin. Others played guitar, flute, cello. They were not perfect, but they were real. They played with joy and gratitude. The audience loved it. Margaret played too. She played the same Fauré nocturne she had played at the masterclass. This time she was not nervous. This time she knew she belonged on that stage. She played with confidence and love. When she finished, the audience gave her a standing ovation. She smiled and bowed. She thought about Robert. She knew he was watching. She knew he was proud. After the concert, Victor gave a speech. He talked about how Margaret had changed his life. He talked about how she had taught him the most important lesson of his career, that music without heart is meaningless, but music played with love and truth can change the world. He thanked her publicly. He honored her. Margaret stood on the stage with tears in her eyes. She looked out at the audience. She saw her children and grandchildren in the front row. She saw her students. She saw Victor smiling at her. She saw hundreds of people who had been moved by her story. She felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a poor girl who loved piano, to a woman who gave up her dreams, to a grandmother who found them again. It had not been an easy life. There had been hardship and sacrifice. There had been pain and loss, but there had also been love and beauty and music. And in the end, she had kept her promise. She had honored her younger self. She had shown the world that dreams do not die. They just wait. Margaret realized something important. Her life had not been wasted. The years she spent working and raising children and taking care of Robert were not wasted. Those years had given her the life experience that made her music so powerful. Those years had taught her about love and sacrifice and endurance. Those years had shaped her soul. And her soul was what came through in her music. She would not change anything. She would not go back and choose music over family. She had made the right choices. She had lived a good life. And now in her 70s, she had this gift, this second chance, this opportunity to make music again. It was more precious because she had waited so long. It was more beautiful because she had lived so much. As Margaret left the concert hall that night, surrounded by people who loved her, she felt complete. She had lived fully. She had loved deeply. She had sacrificed willingly. And she had found her way back to music. She had found her way back to herself. She looked up at the stars in the night sky. "Thank you, Robert," she whispered. "Thank you for making me promise. Thank you for believing in me. This is all because of you." And somewhere, somehow, she felt Robert smiling. She felt his love surrounding her. She felt his approval. She had kept her promise. And in doing so, she had not only honored him, she had honored herself. She had honored every person who ever gave up a dream. She had shown the world that it is never too late. Never too late to try. Never too late to love. Never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Margaret's story continued to inspire people for years to come. Long after that day at the master class, people still watched the video. They still cried. They still felt moved to pursue their own dreams. Margaret had become a symbol of hope. A reminder that life is not over until it is over. A proof that courage and love can change everything. And every day in her small home, Margaret sat at her old keyboard and played.
She played for Robert.
She played for herself. She played for the joy of it. And sometimes, when the music was especially beautiful, she would close her eyes and smile, because she knew she had done something important. She had kept her promise. She had made music. She had lived.